She undressed a Mafia boss thinking he was the stripper. An innocent mistake, until she learned the man she pulled into the villa controlled half the city's underworld. Morgan Reed grabbed the man's forearm the second he stepped onto the terrace, unaware that every woman inside was about to cheer for the most dangerous man she'd ever touch. "There you are. Took you long enough," she shouted over the music blasting from the open villa doors. The man barely had time to register her face. She yanked him forward with surprising force for someone balancing in platform sandals and holding a half-empty piña colada. The moment she pulled him through the doorway, 25 women screamed like they were watching a championship game. Morgan had no idea she had just dragged the owner of the private beach villa and a Caribbean mafia boss into Savannah's bachelorette party. The bride, Savannah, wearing a crown made of plastic palm trees and a sash reading "Last Sale Before the Veil," jumped onto the rattan couch. Someone released a cloud of biodegradable confetti that caught the ceiling fan, swirling through the air like tropical snow. A Bluetooth speaker pounded out a remix of Pony. The villa smelled like coconut rum, sunscreen, and the vanilla body oil someone had applied with zero restraint. Morgan didn't even look at the man's face. She only registered broad shoulders, a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, dark tailored pants that cost more than her rent, and the most dangerously controlled expression she had ever seen. Wait, not controlled, frozen, like a predator deciding whether to attack or retreat. What Morgan couldn't see was the storm brewing behind those ice-blue eyes, or how this single mistake would change her life forever. Perfect. Real confusion meant he was committed to the role. "Come on," she insisted, pulling him deeper into the chaos. "You're an hour late. We almost called for a refund." He didn't resist, but his body was rigid, like he wasn't used to anyone touching him without explicit permission. His eyes, sharp, ice blue, and utterly unreadable, swept the room like he was cataloging exits, not counting drunk women in matching bikini cover-ups. Morgan didn't notice. She was too focused on making Savannah's night unforgettable. "Your entertainment has arrived," she declared proudly, spinning him toward the center of the room. The women cheered. A few waved folded bills. One tried to drape a lei made of plastic flowers around his neck. He sidestepped it smoothly, his jaw tightening. Morgan grabbed his wrist again. "No escaping now. Sit." She pointed at the oversized wicker chair they'd positioned near the open terrace doors, ocean breeze cooling the humid air. He didn't move, so she placed both hands on his chest and pushed. He was solid, unmovable, really, but he let her guide him down. The second he sat, the girls erupted again, phones raised, recording everything. Every second of this was being documented, and someone very dangerous was about to see those videos. Morgan climbed onto his lap because Savannah demanded it, and because 3 margaritas had convinced her this was hilarious. She expected him to play along, maybe smirk, maybe say something charming in a terrible fake accent. Instead, he stared at her like she was a species he'd never encountered before. Fascinating. Dangerous. Unfamiliar. Up close, Morgan noticed details. His jaw was carved, sharp enough to cut. His mouth was a hard line, no hint of a smile. His eyes, God, those eyes, were glacial blue with flecks of silver near the pupils, framed by dark lashes that shouldn't be legal on a man. Tattoos peeked from beneath his shirt collar, intricate designs she couldn't fully see. He looked nothing like the last entertainer they'd hired for a friend's birthday in Miami. That guy had worn a tearaway police uniform and done the worm. This man looked like he'd walked off a yacht, or out of a boardroom, or possibly a crime scene. "You don't look very excited," Morgan teased, placing a hand flat on his chest. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her palm. "This is a paid gig. A little enthusiasm would help." His chest expanded with a slow, deliberate breath. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, voice low. accented, Eastern European, maybe Russian, and laced with something that sounded like restrained violence. Morgan laughed. They all say that when they walk in. It's part of the act, right? Savannah shouted from the couch. Take the shirt off. The man didn't react, didn't smile, didn't move except to keep his gaze locked on Morgan's face. Morgan shrugged. Fine, I'll help. She reached for his top button and undid it. His eyes narrowed, just slightly, but he let her continue. The room erupted as she slid the linen shirt open, exposing a chest that absolutely did not belong to any man who stripped for side money. His torso was a landscape of controlled power, defined muscles, sun-bronzed skin, and elaborate tattoos that covered his ribs and curved over his shoulder. Images of ships, compasses, and something written in Cyrillic script. His body looked real. His control looked real. His stare was so focused Morgan almost forgot what she was doing. Almost. She pushed his shirt off his shoulders. He didn't stop her. Didn't move except to watch her face with an intensity that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with tequila. What Morgan was about to learn would turn this embarrassing moment into a living nightmare. The women leaned in closer, gasping, giggling. Someone wolf whistled. Morgan tried to lighten the mood. Okay, usually you'd say something flirty by now. Maybe ask my name? His voice stayed even, calm. I am not the man you think I am. Before Morgan could reply, the terrace doors burst open with enough force to rattle the glass. A man in a black tactical shirt and cargo pants froze mid-stride. His hand hovered near his hip, where Morgan now realized he was carrying a gun. His eyes darted from the half-naked man in the chair, to Morgan sitting on his lap, to the screaming women, to the confetti-covered floor, to the plastic lei someone had abandoned on the marble tile. Silence hit the room like someone had dropped a bomb. Morgan blinked at the armed man. His expression was pure panic. The man in the chair, the man whose lap she was still sitting on, sighed. A slow, controlled exhale that somehow sounded lethal. The armed man cleared his throat. His voice cracked slightly. Mr. Hayes, I apologize for the interruption. Security is waiting at the dock. There's been an incident with one of the boats. They need your immediate authorization. Mr. Hayes, Morgan's blood turned to ice. Every tourist who'd ever visited the Caribbean knew that name. Caspian Hayes, owner of the most exclusive private villas in the region. Rumored connections to international shipping operations that weren't entirely legal. Whispers of organized crime ties that kept law enforcement from multiple countries very, very interested. A man who controlled half the underground trade routes in the Caribbean and lived like a ghost. No interviews, no photos, no public appearances. Morgan was sitting on his lap, with her hands still resting on his bare chest. Strategic CTA placement. If this moment hit you the way it hit me while writing it, take a second to subscribe. It tells me you want more stories like this, and it truly helps me keep making them. Comment where you're watching from, because I need to know. Team Morgan or Team Caspian? She's trapped between running for her life and falling for a man who operates outside every rule. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the villain. It's the system that forces you to choose between safety and freedom. So whose side are you on? She launched herself off him so fast she tripped backward, catching herself on the arm of the couch. Oh my God, I am so sorry. I swear we didn't know. I thought you were... we hired someone. Not that we hired you. Oh my God. Please, someone stop me from talking. The women scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Savannah ducked behind the couch cushions like they offered actual protection. One girl tried to hide behind a potted palm tree. Caspian Hayes stood slowly, picking up his linen shirt but not putting it on. He draped it casually over one shoulder, his tattooed chest still fully exposed under the villa's ambient lighting. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. He took one slow step toward Morgan, then another. The armed man, Lane Nichols, his head of security, stayed frozen by the door, hand still near his weapon, watching his boss like he might need to intervene. But what Caspian was thinking in that moment would set Morgan's entire world on fire. Caspian stopped 2 feet from Morgan. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized. Broader. More dangerous. His eyes, those impossible ice blue eyes, studied her face with the focus of a man who missed nothing. "Your name," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a command delivered in a voice that expected instant obedience. Morgan's throat was dry. Morgan Reed. I'm the event planner. For the party. I am so sorry. This is mortifying. We thought the guy we hired didn't show up and you walked in and I just assumed." "You assumed?" He said it like he was tasting the word, testing it. His gaze flicked to her hand, which was still trembling slightly, then back to her face. "Interesting." Then he turned, slipping his shirt back on with slow, precise movements. He buttoned it halfway, leaving the top open, tattoos still visible. He looked at Lane. "Handle the dock situation. I'll be down in 10 minutes. Lane hesitated. "Sir, should I—" "10 minutes, Lane." Lane nodded once and disappeared. Caspian looked back at Morgan, at the terrified women, at the trashed villa with its confetti-covered floors and half-empty bottles of champagne. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but something close. "Enjoy your party, Ms. Reed," he said softly. Then he walked out onto the terrace and down the stone steps toward the private dock, leaving 25 women in stunned, horrified silence. Morgan stood frozen, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Savannah peeked out from behind the couch. "Did you just molest a mafia boss?" Someone else whispered, "Are we going to die?" Morgan sank onto the couch, still shaking. I pulled him into the party. I sat on his lap. I unbuttoned his shirt. "Yeah," another friend said weakly. "We all saw." Morgan buried her face in her hands. Oh my God. What she didn't see, what none of them saw, was Caspian Hayes at the bottom of those stone steps, making a decision that would trap Morgan in his world forever. What she didn't see, what none of them saw, was Caspian Hayes stopping at the bottom of the stone steps, pulling out his phone, and sending a single message to Lane Nichols. "Find out everything about Morgan Reed, every detail. I want a full report by morning." Because no one had touched Caspian Hayes like that in 10 years. No one had looked at him without fear, without calculation, without knowing exactly who he was. And now, he needed to understand why. Morgan thought she was escaping. She had no idea she was already his. Morgan fled the villa at dawn, sneaking out while the others still slept off their hangovers. She'd spent the entire night replaying every horrifying second. The way she'd grabbed him, pulled him inside, sat on his lap, unbuttoned his shirt. The memory made her physically ill. She caught a taxi to the main resort where they were actually staying, threw her belongings into her suitcase with shaking hands, and considered catching the first flight back to Miami. But Savannah's wedding was in 3 days, and Morgan had responsibilities. Professional obligations. She couldn't just abandon her best friend because she'd accidentally molested a Caribbean crime lord. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, Caspian Hayes sat in his private office overlooking the water, staring at his phone like it had personally offended him. Lane Nichols stood near the door, wisely silent. "Find everything," Caspian said quietly. His voice was controlled, but Lane recognized the steel beneath it. Every history, every detail about that woman. Lane shifted his weight. Sir, with respect, she was just... She dared to manhandle me. Caspian's eyes cut to Lane, ice cold. In 10 years, no one has touched me without explicit permission. No one has looked at me without fear or calculation. And she... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. She thought I was entertainment. What Caspian discovered in his investigation would change everything, and put Morgan in more danger than she could possibly imagine. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Lane had worked for Caspian Hayes for 8 years. He'd seen his boss negotiate multi-million-dollar deals without blinking. He'd watched him stare down cartel leaders and government officials with equal indifference. He'd never seen him rattled, until now. She didn't know who you were, Lane offered carefully. Exactly. Caspian's fingers drummed once against his desk, the only outward sign of his agitation. She pulled me into that party like I was some college student she'd hired off Craigslist. She pushed me into a chair. She sat on my lap. His voice dropped lower, dangerous. She unbuttoned my shirt and looked at me like I was nothing more than a curiosity. Lane said nothing. There was nothing to say. Caspian stood abruptly, crossing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking his private beach. Dawn light painted the water in shades of gold and coral. Somewhere out there, Morgan Reed was probably panicking, probably horrified by what she'd done. Good, he thought. She should be terrified. Except she hadn't been. Not even for a second. That was the problem. 6 hours, Lane, Caspian said without turning around. Not morning. 6 hours. I want to know where she went to school, who she dates, what she eats for breakfast, and why she thought grabbing a stranger off the terrace was an acceptable business practice. Sir? And Lane? Caspian's reflection in the glass was cold, unreadable. If she's connected to anyone I do business with, if there's even a whisper of calculation in her background, I want to know immediately. Lane nodded and left. Caspian remained at the window, his chest still warm where her hand had rested. Her laugh still echoed in his head. Bright, uninhibited, completely unaware of the danger she'd been in. The danger she might still be in, now that she'd been seen with him. He was furious, fascinated, and profoundly unsettled by the realization that for the first time in a decade, someone had treated him like he was ordinary. The file Lane returned with contained something that would shatter Caspian's entire world. 6 hours later, Lane returned with a tablet and an expression that made Caspian's instincts sharpen. Morgan Reed, 28, event coordinator based in Miami. Lane began, scrolling through files. He'd pulled everything. College transcripts, employment history, social media profiles, credit reports, even parking tickets. Graduated from Florida State with a degree in hospitality management. Started her own company 3 years ago. Reed Events. Specializes in destination weddings and corporate retreats. Average income, clean financial history, no criminal record, no suspicious associations. Caspian leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Family? Mother in Tampa, retired elementary school teacher. Father deceased, died 8 years ago in a car accident. One younger brother, currently deployed with the Navy. No significant romantic relationships in the past year. Her last boyfriend was a marketing consultant. They broke up amicably 10 months ago. Social media? Lane pulled up her Instagram profile. Photos of beach weddings, sunset cocktail hours, elaborately decorated tables. Morgan smiling with brides, laughing with her team, toasting with champagne at successful events. Everything was professional, cheerful, and completely genuine. She posts about her work constantly. Client testimonials are excellent. She's built a solid reputation for pulling off high-stress events in exotic locations. The Bachelorette party last night was for her college roommate. Caspian studied the photos, zooming in on one where Morgan stood on a beach at sunset, wind whipping her hair, genuinely laughing at something off camera. She looked free, happy, utterly uncomplicated. She's exactly what she appears to be, Lane concluded. A professional party planner who made an innocent mistake. Something in Caspian's chest loosened. Good. But Lane swiped to a new image, his expression darkening. There's a problem. What Lane was about to show Caspian would turn protection into obsession. The photo showed Morgan leaving a cafe in Miami, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, laughing at something on her screen. The image quality was high, professional surveillance equipment, not a casual snapshot. The metadata indicated it had been taken 2 weeks ago. Caspian's blood went cold. Where did you get this? Recovered from an encrypted phone we confiscated last month during the Port Royal operation. It was buried in a folder labeled Secondary Assets. Lane pulled up the accompanying text file. The notation says, read, secondary leverage if primary target unavailable. The room went silent except for the distant crash of waves against the shore. Caspian's mind raced through the implications with brutal efficiency. The Port Royal operation had been a raid on one of Jesse Wilder's smuggling networks. Wilder, his primary rival for control of Caribbean shipping routes. The man who'd been systematically trying to undermine Caspian's operations for 3 years. They were watching her before last night. Caspian said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. This photo predates the party by 2 weeks. They identified her as potential leverage, but the notation suggests they hadn't determined the primary target yet. Which means they were fishing, building a database of vulnerable people connected to potential enemies. Caspian's jaw tightened. But now she's been seen with you. Publicly, intimately. Lane's expression was grim. If any of those women from the party post photos online, if any of this reaches Wilder's intelligence network, she becomes a confirmed target. Caspian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His mind worked through scenarios with cold precision. Morgan Reed wasn't connected to his world. She had no protection, no understanding of the danger she was in. She probably thought last night was just an embarrassing mistake she could laugh about in a few years. She had no idea that embarrassing mistake might get her killed. Morgan was enjoying her morning coffee at that exact moment. She had no idea armed men were already being dispatched to bring her in. Where is she now? Caspian's voice was harder than before, stripped of any emotion except lethal focus. Checked into the Grand Palms Resort this morning. She hasn't left her room except to get coffee from the lobby. Caspian pulled his phone from his pocket, typing rapidly. Send a car. Bring her here. Quietly. No uniforms, no obvious security presence. I don't want to spook her, but I need her off the street. Lane hesitated. Sir? She'll resist. She doesn't understand the situation. From her perspective, you're just the man she accidentally... Then make her understand. Caspian's eyes were glacial. Tell her I'm requesting a meeting to discuss last night's incident. Be polite. Be professional. But make it clear the request isn't optional. And if she refuses? Caspian turned from the window, his expression cold and absolute. Then you pick her up anyway. I don't care if she's comfortable with it. I care that she's alive. Lane nodded and left to make the arrangements. Caspian returned to the window, watching the morning sun climb higher over the water. Somewhere on this island, Morgan Reed was probably relieved she'd escaped without consequence. She probably thought the worst was over. She had no idea the worst was just beginning. Because Caspian Hayes didn't lose assets. He didn't allow vulnerabilities. And he sure as hell didn't let innocent women wander into danger because they'd had the misfortune of touching him. Morgan Reed had disrupted his carefully controlled world for 30 chaotic minutes. Now, whether she liked it or not, she was about to become his responsibility. And in Caspian's world, responsibility meant absolute control. He pulled out his phone and sent one final message to Lane. When you bring her in, route her through the east entrance. I don't want her seen by anyone else on the property. And Lane, treat her gently. She's not a threat. She's a complication. The distinction mattered. Threats he eliminated. Complications he controlled. And Morgan Reed, with her bright laugh and complete lack of fear, had just become the most dangerous complication of his entire career. The knock on Morgan's hotel room door came sooner than anyone expected, and her life as she knew it was about to end. Morgan was toweling off her hair after a shower when someone knocked on her hotel room door. Hard. Official. The kind of knock that said, "This is not room service." She wrapped her bathrobe tighter and peered through the peephole. Lane Nichols stood in the hallway, still wearing tactical gear despite the tropical heat, flanked by two men who looked like they bench-pressed cars for fun. All three wore earpieces and expressions that suggested they took their jobs very seriously. Morgan's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She cracked the door open, keeping the chain latched. "Can I help you?" Lane's expression was professionally neutral, not threatening, but not warm either. "Ms. Reed, Mr. Hayes requests your presence." Every instinct Morgan had screamed at her to slam the door and call. Who? Hotel security? The police? What exactly would she say? "Help, the man whose shirt I unbuttoned last night wants to talk to me." "I already apologized," Morgan said, hating how her voice shook. "I didn't mean to. I thought he was someone else. I explained all of this. This isn't about the party, ma'am." Lane's tone softened slightly, almost sympathetic. "Please, it's urgent, and it concerns your safety." The word safety did things to Morgan's nervous system that weren't helpful. "My safety? Mr. Hayes will explain everything, but we need to leave now." Lane glanced down the hallway, his hand drifting toward his hip in a gesture that made Morgan wonder exactly what he was carrying under that tactical vest. "Please, Ms. Reed, this is important." 20 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a tank top because she'd been too rattled to think about fashion, Morgan sat in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows so dark she couldn't see outside. Lane drove in silence. The two large men sat in a separate vehicle that followed them like a shadow. "Where are we going?" Morgan asked for the third time. "The villa," Lane replied. "I thought the party trashed it." "Different section." That was all he said. What Morgan was being driven toward would redefine every concept of freedom she'd ever known. They arrived through a side entrance Morgan hadn't known existed, a narrow road that wound through tropical vegetation before opening onto a private driveway flanked by security gates that looked like they belonged at a military installation. Guards waved them through without question. Lane parked near a service entrance and led Morgan through corridors she definitely hadn't seen during the party. These halls were quieter, colder, more industrial. Cameras tracked their movement from every angle. Doors required keycard access. Everything screamed, "This is not a vacation rental." Finally, Lane stopped at an unmarked door, swiped his card, and gestured for Morgan to enter. The room beyond looked like something out of a spy movie. Sterile white walls. A massive desk made of dark wood and glass. Monitors lined one wall, showing security feeds from every angle of the property. The beach, the dock, the main villa, even the road they'd just driven. Everything was visible, controlled, observed. Caspian Hayes sat behind the desk, looking like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company pretending to be on vacation. He wore a dark suit despite the heat, crisp white shirt open at the collar, no tie. His hair was styled back, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face. Those ice-blue eyes tracked Morgan's entrance with an intensity that made her want to run. But Lane had already closed the door behind her. Caspian gestured to the leather chair across from him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. The file on that tablet contained secrets about Morgan's life that even she didn't know. Morgan sat, pulse hammering so loud she was certain he could hear it. If this is about last night, it's not. His voice was calm, controlled, utterly devoid of emotion. He slid a tablet across the desk toward her. Look at the screen. Morgan's hands trembled as she picked it up. The display showed what looked like a dossier. Her face at the top, followed by page after page of information. Her college graduation photo, her business registration documents, screenshots of her Instagram posts, client testimonials, even her credit score, which she'd been trying very hard to improve after that trip to Bali last year. Her voice came out small. How did you... I know everything about you, Ms. Reed. Caspian leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Florida State University, hospitality management degree, graduated magna cum laude. You started Reed Events 3 years ago after working for Coastal Celebrations in Fort Lauderdale. Your mother lives in Tampa in a modest condo near the water. Your brother is deployed somewhere in the Pacific with the Navy. Exact location classified. But you worry about him constantly based on your text message patterns. You broke up with your last boyfriend 10 months ago because he wanted you to give up your business and move to Atlanta for his career. Morgan's throat went dry. You read my text messages? I read everything. No apology, no justification, just cold fact. Your business grossed $173,000 last year. You owe $42,000 in student loans. You donate monthly to 3 charities: ocean conservation, literacy programs, and veteran support organizations. You're allergic to shellfish, but you lie about it at client events because you don't want to seem difficult. Morgan set the tablet down with shaking hands. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand something. Caspian stood slowly, moving around the desk with predatory grace. He stopped a few feet away, towering over her. Last night was not just an embarrassing mistake. Last night made you visible. And in my world, visibility is dangerous. I don't understand what you're... Lane. Caspian didn't take his eyes off Morgan. Lane appeared from somewhere behind her. She hadn't even realized he was still in the room. He held another tablet, this one showing a different image. The photo Lane was about to show her would destroy everything Morgan thought she knew about her safety. Morgan stared at the photo of herself leaving Cafe Cubano in Miami, coffee in hand, laughing at something on her phone. She remembered that day, 2 weeks ago, right before she'd flown down to start setting up Savannah's Bachelorette weekend. Why do you have this? Lane's voice was gentle but firm. This photo was recovered from an encrypted phone we confiscated last month during an operation against a rival organization. It was stored in a folder labeled Secondary Assets, along with information about your daily routine, your home address, and your mother's condo in Tampa. Morgan's blood turned to ice. What? Caspian crouched down to her eye level, his face inches from hers. Someone has been watching you, Morgan. Someone dangerous. Someone who identified you as potential leverage weeks before you ever walked into that party. Leverage for what? I don't know anything. I plan parties. I arrange catering and decorations and... Her voice cracked. I don't have anything to do with whatever you... You don't. Caspian's tone softened, just barely. But they don't know that. They were building a database of vulnerable people connected to anyone I might care about. Fishing for weak points. And somehow, through pure coincidence or cosmic irony, they flagged you. Morgan couldn't breathe. But I wasn't connected to you. Not until you dragged me into a bachelorette party and sat on my lap in front of 25 witnesses. Something flickered in Caspian's eyes. Not quite amusement, but close. Now you're not just a theoretical target. You're a confirmed connection. And if any of those women posted photos online, if any of this reaches the wrong people, I'm in danger. Morgan finished the sentence because she needed to hear herself say it. Needed it to be real so her brain would stop trying to rationalize this away. Yes. Caspian stood, offering her his hand. She didn't take it. You've been marked, Morgan, by people who want leverage against me. People who will use you, hurt you, or kill you without hesitation if it serves their purpose. Morgan stared at the photo on the tablet, herself, smiling, completely unaware that someone had been watching, hunting. What do they want? Territory, money, power. Caspian's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're on their radar, which means you're now on mine. So what do I do? Do I go to the police? Do I leave the island? I have Savannah's wedding in 2 days. I can't just... What Caspian said next would strip away every illusion of freedom Morgan had left. You'll do exactly what I tell you, Caspian said, his voice hardening into steel. You will stay in the most secure part of this property until we determine the extent of the threat. You will not leave without my explicit permission. You will not contact anyone outside this compound without clearance from Lane. You will not post on social media, call your mother, or send so much as an emoji to your college roommate without running it through my security team first. Morgan shot to her feet, adrenaline overriding fear. You can't imprison me because of something I didn't even know I was doing. I'm not imprisoning you. Caspian stepped closer. His presence overwhelming, his eyes locked on hers with absolute authority. I am protecting you. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Then adjust your perspective. His voice dropped lower, dangerous. I am responsible for your danger, Ms. Reed. Someone targeted you because I exist in your orbit. That makes your safety my responsibility. And I take my responsibilities very seriously. Morgan wanted to argue, wanted to demand her freedom, call a lawyer, do literally anything except submit to being controlled by a man who terrified and inexplicably attracted her in equal measure. But the photo on the tablet stopped her. Someone had been watching, following her, planning. She sank back into the chair, legs suddenly too weak to hold her. For how long? Until the threat is neutralized. Caspian returned to his side of the desk, his expression softening slightly. Lane will escort you to your quarters. You'll have everything you need. Clothes, toiletries, food, entertainment. If you require anything specific, ask. Within reason, it will be provided. What about Savannah's wedding? We'll assess the situation as it develops. She's my best friend. I can't just disappear. You can and you will. Caspian's tone left no room for negotiation. I'll have someone contact her with an appropriate excuse. Food poisoning, perhaps. She'll understand. Morgan's throat burned with unshed tears. This isn't fair. No, Caspian agreed quietly. It's not. But fair doesn't matter. Alive matters. And I will keep you alive, Morgan, even if you hate me for it. Lane appeared at her elbow, gentle but firm. Ms. Reed? Morgan stood on shaking legs and followed him to the door. She stopped at the threshold, turning back to look at Caspian. He stood silhouetted against the wall of monitors, surrounded by surveillance feeds and security protocols, looking every inch the powerful, dangerous man he actually was. You're terrifying, she whispered. His eyes met hers across the room. I know, but you're alive, and you'll stay that way. It wasn't a promise. It was a threat to anyone who tried to prove him wrong. Morgan's gilded cage was more beautiful than any prison had a right to be, but the bars were still there, invisible and absolute. The guest wing was beautiful in the way prisons could be beautiful if they had unlimited budgets and interior designers who favored minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens that stretched toward the ocean. The bedroom featured a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than Morgan's monthly rent. The bathroom had a rainfall shower, a soaking tub, and toiletries from brands she couldn't pronounce but recognized from magazine spreads. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything screamed gilded cage. Morgan stood at the window, watching armed guards patrol the perimeter in carefully timed intervals. They wore casual clothes, polo shirts, khakis, but the way they moved, the way their eyes constantly scanned the horizon, marked them as anything but casual. Every 30 seconds, a different guard passed beneath her window. Overlapping coverage, no blind spots. She was being protected. She was being watched. The distinction felt meaningless. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Lane or maybe one of the efficient, silent staff members who'd delivered her lunch earlier. Caspian Hayes stepped inside, still wearing that devastating dark suit, still radiating controlled power that made the spacious room feel suddenly smaller. He carried a tablet under one arm, and Retry K continued DA expression that suggested this visit was business, not pleasure. "How are you settling in?" His tone was polite, professional, like he was checking on a hotel guest rather than a woman he'd essentially imprisoned. Morgan crossed her arms over her chest. "Is that a real question, or are you just being polite?" "Real question." "Then I'm terrified, furious, and trying very hard not to cry because I don't want to give you the satisfaction." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she was beyond caring. "How's that for honesty?" Something flickered in Caspian's eyes. Not quite amusement, but not displeasure either. Better than false gratitude. He moved deeper into the room, setting the tablet on the coffee table before settling into one of the leather armchairs positioned near the window. He gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit with me. Please." The please surprised her enough that Morgan obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat like she might need to bolt at any moment. Caspian watched her with that unnerving intensity, his ice-blue eyes cataloging every detail. "I understand this is difficult." "Difficult?" Morgan laughed, the sound brittle. "You've trapped me here. You've cut me off from everyone I know. You've turned my life upside down because I made one stupid mistake." "You didn't make a mistake." His voice cut through her rising panic like a blade. "You acted with the information you had. The stripper you hired didn't show up. You saw someone walking onto the property and assumed he was your entertainment. That's not stupidity. That's logical problem-solving under pressure." "Except the someone I grabbed was you." "Except that." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Which brings us to our current situation." What Caspian was about to admit would blur every line Morgan had drawn between captor and protector. Morgan wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the tropical heat filtering through the windows. "I don't understand why this is happening." "You said someone was watching me before the party, before I ever touched you. So how is this my fault?" Caspian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his focus entirely on her face. "It's not your fault. But you physically interacted with me in a way that will be documented, photographed, and analyzed by people who are very good at finding weaknesses. You sat on my lap, Morgan. You unbuttoned my shirt. You touched me with an intimacy that suggests connection, familiarity, importance." Heat crept up Morgan's neck at the memory. "I thought you were a stripper. That's literally what strippers do." "I know that. You know that. But to anyone reviewing security footage or social media posts from that party, it looks like you have access to me. Influence over me." His jaw tightened. "In my world, that makes you a target. But I don't have access or influence. I'm nobody to you. Caspian's gaze didn't waver. That's what I'm trying to prevent them from learning. Because if they discover you're truly unconnected, if they realize you're just an innocent event planner who made a mistake, they'll still use you. They'll grab you, hurt you, and send me proof of what they've done as a message, as a warning, as a demonstration of how close they can get to my world. The room felt too small suddenly, too warm. Morgan's chest constricted with the weight of what he was saying. So you're confining me here because I'm in danger because of you. Yes. And you're responsible for that danger. Yes. So you've decided you have the right to control every aspect of my life until you decide the threat is over. She met his eyes, refusing to back down. Did I get that right? Essentially, yes. No apology, no hedging, just brutal honesty. I am responsible for your danger, which means I must control your safety. Those two things are inseparable in my world. Morgan wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to demand he let her go immediately. But the calm certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he was right, made her hesitate. Because as much as she hated this, as much as she resented being trapped, she couldn't deny the tiny, traitorous part of her brain that whispered, "He's keeping you alive." "How long?" she asked quietly. "Until the threat is neutralized." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." Caspian stood, moving to the window to stare out at the gardens below. His shoulders were tense beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. "I've already put additional resources toward identifying who's targeting you and why. Lane's team is running surveillance on known associates of my rivals. We're monitoring communications, tracking movements, building a complete picture of the threat landscape. And if you can't neutralize it, if this goes on for weeks, months?" He turned back to face her, and for the first time she saw something human beneath the control. Concern, maybe. Or guilt. "Then you stay here for weeks or months. I won't apologize for prioritizing your life over your freedom." The touch that came next would change everything between them, crossing a line neither of them could uncross. Morgan stood, crossing to where he stood. She had to crane her neck to meet his eyes, had to fight the instinct to step back from the sheer presence he commanded. "This isn't protection, Caspian. This is control. And the fact that you can't see the difference is terrifying." His jaw tightened. "I see the difference perfectly. I've simply decided that your safety matters more than your comfort." "That's not your decision to make." "It is now." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, possessive, and completely at odds with the steel in his voice. "I will keep you alive, Morgan Reed. Even if you hate me for it. Even if you never forgive me. Your life is not negotiable." His touch sent electricity down her spine, made her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the unwilling attraction she'd been fighting since he'd walked into her life. She hated that she was drawn to his strength. Hated that his protective dominance made something deep inside her respond. Hated that even now, terrified and trapped, she couldn't quite bring herself to pull away from his hand. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "I know." His thumb traced her cheekbone, his eyes darkening. "But you're alive, and that's all that matters." He dropped his hand and walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. "Dinner will be brought to you at 7. If you need anything, Lane has stationed someone outside your door. Tell them, and it will be provided." Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Morgan sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. She was trapped, protected, and dangerously, impossibly attracted to the man who'd made himself responsible for her survival. God help her. 3 days of suffocating tension passed, and then the world exploded, literally. 3 days passed in suffocating tension. Morgan barely saw Caspian, though she felt his presence everywhere. In the guards outside her door, the restricted access to communications, the meals delivered precisely on time. She was a bird in a gilded cage, and the bars were made of his absolute control. On the 4th morning, she stood on her private balcony, watching the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly, beautiful and indifferent. A boat moved erratically just outside the restricted zone, zigzagging in patterns that didn't match normal fishing routes. Morgan frowned, leaning forward against the railing. Something felt wrong. Then the world exploded. The shockwave hit first, a wall of pressure that knocked her backward. Fire erupted across the water as the distant boat detonated in a massive fireball. The blast was so powerful she felt it in her chest, in her bones. Glass shattered somewhere inside the villa. Alarms screamed. Smoke billowed black against the perfect blue sky. Morgan couldn't process what was happening, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, yanking her down, shielding her body with his own. Caspian's chest pressed against her back, his weight pinning her to the floor as debris rained down around them. Bits of glass, splinters of wood, ash falling like toxic snow. "Stay down," he growled into her ear, his voice raw with something that sounded like fear. Morgan's heart slammed against her ribs. Caspian's arms were locked around her, protective and possessive, his entire body covering hers like a human shield. She could feel his heart pounding against her spine, fast, frantic, human. What Caspian did in those seconds revealed a truth he'd been fighting for days. The chaos lasted seconds but felt like hours. When the world finally quieted except for distant shouting and the wail of alarms, Caspian pulled her up with hands that shook slightly. His eyes were wild as they scanned her for injuries, his fingers gripping her shoulders hard enough to bruise. "Are you hurt?" His voice cracked on the words. "No, I'm fine." His control cracked completely. He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. His breath harsh against her hair. "Christ, Morgan, you were standing right there. If you'd been 2 feet closer to the rail." "Lane." His shout cut through the smoke-filled air. Lane appeared, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow, his weapon drawn. "Wilder. It's confirmed. He just declared war." Caspian's entire body went rigid. The fear in his eyes transformed into something colder, deadlier. "The villa is compromised. Prepare the jet. We're moving her to the estate." "Sir." "Now, Lane." Within the hour, Morgan sat in a private jet next to Caspian, watching the Caribbean disappear below. He hadn't spoken since they'd boarded, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming an agitated rhythm against his thigh. The control he'd exhibited so perfectly before was fracturing, revealing something darker underneath. Finally, he turned to her. "You are the liability I am now responsible for." Morgan flinched like he'd slapped her. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." His eyes held hers, fierce and unyielding. "But Jesse Wilder just tried to kill you to get to me. This isn't about protection anymore, Morgan. This is war. And you're standing in the crossfire." Morgan's new prison was a fortress, and the woman who arrived there would teach her something crucial about the man holding her captive. The estate sprawled across private acres on the mainland, a fortress disguised as paradise. High walls covered in flowering vines, armed guards patrolling invisible perimeters, security cameras hidden among the tropical foliage. Morgan's new quarters occupied the entire west wing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens and, far in the distance, the ocean that had nearly killed her. It was beautiful. It was a prison. and Morgan was beginning to lose track of which feeling dominated. Days blurred together in a strange rhythm. Mornings, she woke to find breakfast already prepared. Fresh fruit, strong coffee, pastries that tasted like they'd been flown in from Paris. She ate alone on her private terrace, watching guards change shifts with military precision. Afternoons, she read books from Caspian's extensive library, swam in the pool under the watchful eyes of security, and tried not to think about how her entire life had been reduced to waiting. Waiting for the threat to pass. Waiting for Caspian to decide she could leave. Waiting for her heart to stop racing every time she heard his voice in the hallway. She caught glimpses of him throughout the day, always moving, always working. Through windows, she saw him in his office, surrounded by men in expensive suits, his voice low and commanding as he orchestrated moves she couldn't begin to understand. Once, she walked past a conference room and heard him speaking rapid fire in what sounded like Russian, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. He was intense, professional, utterly in control, and she couldn't stop watching him. On the fifth night, Caspian's sister arrived unannounced. Morgan was picking at dinner in the formal dining room, alone as usual, when a woman breezed in like she owned the place, which, Morgan supposed, she probably did. Jade Hayes was about to reveal the one thing Caspian never wanted Morgan to know. Jade Hayes looked nothing like her brother. Where Caspian was all sharp angles and controlled violence, Jade was soft curves and easy warmth. Petite, with dark curls that tumbled past her shoulders and dancing brown eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans and a silk blouse, looking effortlessly elegant in a way that made Morgan acutely aware of her own yoga pants and oversized t-shirt. "So you're the one," Jade said, sliding into the chair across from Morgan without invitation. She poured herself wine from the bottle on the table, studying Morgan with unconcealed curiosity. Morgan blinked. "The one what?" "The one who made my brother lose his mind." Jade's smile was knowing, conspiratorial. "I'm Jade. Caspian's significantly more charming sister." "Morgan." She shook the offered hand, still processing. "I didn't know he had a sister." "He doesn't advertise it. Bad for the mysterious crime lord image." Jade took a sip of wine, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "But I've been hearing some very interesting reports about you, Morgan Reed." "Reports?" "Oh yes. Caspian's been obsessing, pacing his office, checking security feeds every 5 minutes, redirecting half his resources to protect one woman." Jade leaned forward. "Do you know how unprecedented that is? My brother doesn't do personal involvement. He hasn't shown this level of emotional investment in years. Decades, actually." Morgan's chest tightened. "He's just protecting an asset, a liability he feels responsible for." "Oh, sweetheart." Jade's laugh was warm, genuine. "You're not an asset, and you're definitely not a liability. You're the first person in 10 years who's gotten past his walls without even trying." "I don't understand." Jade's expression softened. "After our parents died, murdered, really, though no one could ever prove it, Caspian rebuilt himself into something untouchable. No vulnerabilities, no weaknesses, no personal attachments that could be used against him. He's been a ghost for a decade, Morgan. Powerful, feared, and completely alone. Until I grabbed him off a terrace and sat on his lap," Morgan said weakly. "Until you treated him like a regular person instead of a threat." Jade reached across the table, squeezing Morgan's hand. "You disrupted everything he'd built, and he has no idea how to handle it." Before Morgan could respond, Caspian appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Jade, out!" Jade winked at Morgan and stood, completely unfazed by her brother's anger. "We should do lunch, Morgan. I have so many embarrassing childhood stories to share." "Jade." I'm going. She kissed Caspian's cheek as she passed, whispering something Morgan couldn't hear. Caspian's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. When they were alone, Caspian stayed in the doorway, watching Morgan with that impossible intensity. "My sister talks too much." "She's honest," Morgan countered. "She's reckless." But his voice had softened. He crossed the room slowly, stopping at the edge of the table. "Are you comfortable here?" "I'm trapped here." "You're safe here." The distinction seemed important to him. Morgan set down her fork, meeting his eyes. "Your sister said I disrupted everything." Caspian was silent for a long moment. Then he moved around the table, pulling out the chair beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You did." "I didn't mean to." "I know." His hand lifted, hesitated, then touched her cheek. Just a whisper of contact that sent electricity through her entire body. His thumb traced her bottom lip, his eyes darkening as they followed the movement. "For 10 years, I've been untouchable, unreachable. I built walls so high no one could get close enough to hurt me. And then I yanked you into a bachelorette party. And then you looked at me like I was ordinary." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "Like I was just a man, not a threat, not a weapon, just someone." Morgan's breath caught. Caspian! The confession that came next would shatter every defense Morgan had built against him. "You disrupted everything, Morgan." His fingers slid into her hair, tilting her face up toward his. "My control, my focus, my carefully constructed isolation. And now I can't." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "I can't let you go." "You don't own me," she whispered, even as her body leaned toward his. "I know." His forehead touched hers, his eyes closing briefly. "But I need you safe. I need to know you're protected. I need—" He pulled back abruptly, his control slamming back into place like a steel door. "You should finish your dinner." He left before Morgan could find her voice, before she could tell him that she felt it too. The magnetic pull, the dangerous attraction, the terrifying realization that she was falling for the man who'd taken control of her entire life. The intelligence that came at 3 a.m. would force Caspian to make an impossible choice: trust Morgan or lose her forever. The breakthrough came during a routine intelligence sweep. Lane burst into Caspian's office at 3 in the morning, tablet in hand, expression grim. Morgan heard the commotion from her bedroom, raised voices, heavy footsteps, the unmistakable tension of a crisis unfolding. She crept to her door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Traced back to a proximity ping from her device," Lane was saying, his voice tight with stress. "Show me." Caspian's voice was cold, lethal. Morgan's stomach dropped. She opened the door quietly, padding barefoot down the hallway toward Caspian's office. The door was ajar. Light spilling into the dark corridor. Inside, Caspian stood behind his desk, staring at a tablet with an expression that made her blood run cold. Lane stood nearby, tactical gear suggesting he'd been pulled from active duty. "A critical intelligence asset was compromised 3 hours ago," Lane said. "The leak was traced to a proximity ping from Morgan's secure communications device. The data is conclusive." Caspian's hands clenched into fists. "How is that possible? She hasn't had unsupervised access to any technology since we arrived." "I don't know, sir, but the digital trail leads directly to her." Morgan's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the doorframe for support, her movement catching their attention. Both men turned. Lane looked guilty. Caspian looked empty. Like someone had hollowed him out and left only cold calculation behind. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" His voice was quiet, controlled rage barely contained beneath the surface. "Find out what?" Morgan stepped into the office, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "I don't know what you're talking about." He threw the tablet onto the desk between them. Explain that. Morgan stared at the screen, at data and codes she didn't understand, at digital proof of something she absolutely hadn't done. I can't. I haven't contacted anyone. I haven't even had access to my phone since… The device logged a transmission 3 hours ago, a proximity ping that compromised one of my most valuable intelligence assets. Each word was precise, controlled, lethal. That asset is now dead, Morgan. Executed. Because someone knew exactly where to find him. I didn't do this. Her voice broke. Caspian, please, you have to believe me. I would never… Then how do you explain it? He moved around the desk with predatory grace, stopping inches from her. Up close, she could see the betrayal in his eyes, the doubt warring with something that looked horribly like pain. The evidence is irrefutable. Either you're an unwitting mole, someone planted a tracker on you without your knowledge, or you're intentionally working for Wilder. Caspian's next decision would either save Morgan's life or destroy any chance they had together. Morgan's chest constricted. You think I'm a spy? You think I've been lying this entire time? I don't know what to think. His jaw clenched. But I can't risk it. I can't trust you. Caspian, Lane will relocate you to an emergency safe house until we determine the extent of the compromise. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. You'll be under constant surveillance. No communications, no technology, no contact with anyone until this is resolved. So you're just going to lock me away? Decide I'm guilty without any proof? The proof is right there, he said quietly, gesturing to the tablet. And I will not risk more lives on hope. Lane touched Morgan's elbow gently. Ms. Reed, please. We need to move now. Morgan stared at Caspian's back, at the man who'd promised to protect her, who'd looked at her like she mattered, who'd told her she disrupted everything. I didn't betray you, she whispered. He didn't turn around, didn't respond, just stood there like a statue. Every line of his body radiating cold fury and devastating doubt. Lane led her away. She didn't fight, didn't argue. What was the point? Caspian had already decided. The emergency safe house wasn't safe at all. And Morgan was about to discover exactly how deep Wilder's reach went. The emergency safe house was exactly what it sounded like. Sterile, isolated, functional. A concrete building hidden in dense forest, surrounded by guards who watched her like she might detonate at any moment. 3 days passed. Morgan saw no one except the silent staff who delivered meals and the guards who'd changed shifts with mechanical precision. No one spoke to her. No one explained what was happening. She felt like a ghost. On the 4th morning, Lane appeared with orders to move her again. New intelligence suggests this location is compromised. We're relocating to a secondary site. Morgan didn't ask questions. What was the point? She climbed into the armored SUV, flanked by guards, and watched the forest blur past. They were 20 minutes from the safe house when the first shot rang out. The lead vehicle exploded, flipping onto its side and blocking the narrow road. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, coordinated, professional, overwhelming. Glass shattered. Metal shrieked. Someone screamed. Lane shoved Morgan down, his body covering hers as bullets punched through the reinforced windows. Stay down! The world dissolved into chaos. Smoke, blood, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Lane took a round to the shoulder, blood blooming across his tactical vest. He kept fighting, kept moving, his weapon barking sharp reports into the forest. Morgan couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was it. This was how she died. Then something sharp pricked her neck. Sedative. Her vision blurred immediately. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but her limbs wouldn't cooperate. Through the haze, she saw armed men in black tactical gear dragging her from the wreckage. Saw Lane fighting 3 men at once, his face a mask of rage and determination. Saw the forest spinning as someone threw her over their shoulder. Then darkness swallowed her whole. Morgan was about to learn the real reason she'd been targeted, and the truth would destroy everything she thought she knew about her father. Morgan woke to sterile white walls and the chemical smell of antiseptic. Her head pounded like someone had used it for a drum. Her wrists were bound to a metal chair with zip ties that bit into her skin. Every muscle ached. A door opened. Jesse Wilder entered, tall, lean, with sharp features and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He looked like a businessman, dressed in expensive slacks and a crisp button-down. Nothing about him screamed criminal. That somehow made him more terrifying. He pulled up a chair, sitting backward on it like they were old friends catching up. "Morgan Reed, we finally meet properly." Morgan's voice came out hoarse, her throat raw. "What do you want?" "Information, initially. Leverage against Hayes." Wilder leaned forward, studying her face with clinical interest. "But then I learned something fascinating. Your father, James Reed, had ties to my organization. Did you know that?" Morgan's blood went cold. "My father died 8 years ago." "He did. Car accident, very tragic." Wilder's smile widened. "But not before accumulating a rather substantial debt. $140,000 to be precise. With interest over 8 years, it's nearly doubled." "That's insane. I don't owe you anything." "According to our records, responsibility for that debt transfers to next of kin." Wilder stood, circling her chair slowly. "Your father borrowed money for a business venture that failed. He promised to repay us. Then he died, leaving you and your mother to shoulder his mistakes." Morgan's mind reeled. Her father had always struggled financially. But debts to criminals? "Even if that's true, I can't pay you. I don't have that kind of money." "Oh, I know." Wilder stopped behind her, his breath cold against her ear. "But lucky for you, I've found another way you can settle the debt. Caspian Hayes has something I want. Territory. Shipping routes, intelligence networks. You're going to help me take it from him." "I'd rather die." "That can be arranged." His voice was pleasant, conversational. "But I think you'll cooperate. Because if you don't, I'll kill everyone you love, starting with your mother in Tampa. Then maybe that brother of yours when he rotates back from deployment." Terror squeezed Morgan's chest. "Don't you dare!" The door exploded inward. And Caspian Hayes arrived like vengeance incarnate. The door exploded inward. Caspian moved like controlled violence incarnate. Fast, brutal, unstoppable. He took down the first guard with a single strike that sent the man crashing into the wall. Disarmed the second before he could raise his weapon. Had Wilder slammed against the opposite wall before Morgan could process what was happening. "Touch her again," Caspian said quietly, his forearm pressed against Wilder's throat. "And I will erase you from existence." Wilder laughed, blood trickling from his mouth. "Too late, Hayes. She's already mine. Her father owed me." Caspian's fist connected with Wilder's jaw. Once. Twice. The sound was sickening. Final. Bone meeting bone with devastating force. Wilder collapsed, unconscious or dead. Morgan couldn't tell which. Caspian crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling a knife from his belt and cutting her restraints with shaking hands. His eyes were wild as they scanned her face, her body, checking for injuries with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Are you hurt? Did he—" Morgan couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, and broke. Sobs tore from her throat. Terror, relief, exhaustion. Everything she'd been holding back for days came pouring out. Caspian's arms locked around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, his entire body trembling. "I didn't betray you," she sobbed against his shirt. "I swear I didn't." The words Caspian said next would heal everything, or destroy them both. "I know." His voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I know, Morgan. I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, his eyes glittering with unshed tears. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought they'd kill you, and it would be my fault." "I'm here," Morgan whispered, framing his face with trembling hands. "I'm here, Caspian." His eyes searched hers, ice blue and desperate and completely unguarded. "I love you. I've loved you since you sat on my lap and didn't recognize danger when it stared you in the face. I've loved you through every terrifying moment since. And the thought of losing you..." His voice broke completely. I can't lose you. You won't." Morgan pulled him down, kissing him with everything she had. Fear and relief and love so intense it hurt. "I love you too. Even when you're terrifying. Even when you doubt me. Even when you're impossible." He kissed her back fiercely, desperately, like she might disappear if he let go. Around them, Lane and the tactical team secured the location, but Morgan barely noticed. She was safe. She was loved. She was his. 2 weeks later, everything changed, and Caspian Hayes was about to do something he'd sworn he'd never do: let someone in completely. 2 weeks later, Morgan stood on the terrace of Caspian's estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Her body had healed, the bruises faded, the cuts scarred over. But the memories still haunted her dreams. Wilder was dead. His network dismantled. The threat neutralized. Morgan's father's supposed debt had been a fabrication, a manipulation tactic designed to break her. Lane had survived his injuries and was back on duty, though he walked with a slight limp now. Caspian appeared beside her, a small velvet box in his hand. He looked different somehow. Softer, more open, like he'd finally let himself be vulnerable. "My intent was solidified long before the climax," he said quietly, opening the box to reveal an elaborate ring. Sapphires the color of his eyes, surrounded by diamonds that caught the fading light. "I knew the moment you undid my shirt button that you were going to change my life forever." Morgan stared at the ring, her breath catching. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything." He took the ring from the box, holding it between them. "Marry me, Morgan. Be mine. Officially, legally, permanently. Caspian. I know I'm difficult. I know I'm controlling. I know I've made mistakes." His voice was steady, certain. "But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Morgan's answer would seal both their fates, choosing a life most people would run from, but she was walking toward willingly. Morgan took the ring from his fingers, studying the man who'd terrified her, protected her, and loved her with an intensity that still took her breath away. "Yes," she said finally. "But on one condition." His eyebrow lifted. "Name it." "I am not a possession or a weakness, Caspian Hayes. If I marry you, I'm choosing this life, not being trapped by it. I need you to understand that distinction." A slow smile spread across his face, genuine, warm, transforming his entire appearance. "You are my strength, Morgan." He pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. "And you are only mine." Morgan slid the ring onto her finger, accepting him, accepting this impossible life. "Then I guess I'm stuck with you. Completely." He kissed her as the sun disappeared below the horizon, sealing a promise forged in chaos and terror and love that refused to be controlled. She'd stumbled into his world by accident, but she was staying by choice. And God help anyone who tried to take her from him again. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Comment where you're watching from. I love knowing this story found you. And share this with someone who needs to hear that choosing love, even dangerous love, can be the bravest thing you ever do. Thanks for being here.